Chapter 931. Nolan heard some noise and lifted his eyelids slightly. "I'm back." Maisie sat down next to him, leaned her head against his shoulder, looking exhausted, and responded, "Uh-huh." Nolan raised his hand and rubbed the top of her head. "Isn't it over already?" "Yeah." Maisie's eyes drooped slightly. "I punished them, and I seem to have become an evil person." He turned his head to look at her and smirked. "Then am I not evil?" Maisie rested her chin on his shoulder, looked up at him, and chuckled knowing that he was coaxing her. "Then how much do you think I've learned from you?" Nolan kissed her and rubbed her cheek with his palm. "You've given him a taste of his own medicine. You've done well." After that, Johnny was sent to the hospital. He got what he deserved as he became extremely disgusted by anything that was related to sex. He could not even have a heart-on ever since. Barbara did not plan to sue him after learning about his condition. Thus, she left Busburg after being discharged from the hospital. Maisie asked her why she would want to let him go. Barbara told her that she thought this was already the best revenge, and she did not want to cause him too much. Speaking of this, Barbara laughed. "Riley has always said that I resemble you, but I'm, in fact, the weakest one among us, because I get sympathetic very easily. I've once thought of becoming an evil person, and I even used you to help me out with my personal matters. But I'm the one who made a mess out of things in the end and had to rely on you to clean them up for me." Maisie leaned against the window, looking out of it, but she then shifted her gaze onto Barbara's face. "It's not wrong to be sympathetic. At least you got to be true to yourself." She walked to the couch, sat down, picked up the orange on the table, and peeled it. "Since you didn't choose to bring Riley any harm back then, I knew that you wouldn't do that to me either. Barbara used me to obtain the video from Katrina. But she didn't set me up for anything after that. She didn't even want to use Riley, who was the closest to the Bouchers. So why would I think that Barbara would hurt me just like those who have done so before this?" Perhaps it was precisely because she knew that Barbara's true nature was pure and kind that was why Maisie got to really know her, get in touch with her, and even help her. Barbara smiled. "I could die happy now, knowing that I have you two as my friends." "Nobody's going to die." "That sounds so unlucky." Maisie placed an orange segment in her mouth, chewed, and frowned due to the sourness. "Can't you think of something better? Such as when to give birth to a baby so that I can play with that little cutie pie." Barbara choked on her saliva and rolled her eyes. "Shouldn't you have enough fun with those three, back home?" Maisie kept eating the oranges. "Those three are no longer adorable and fun since they've all grown up." At that moment, Riley's voice came from outside the door. "Holy shit. Shit just happened." The two looked over simultaneously and saw Riley standing outside the door, panting. "What's the big deal?" Riley pointed at her cell phone and said in a panic, "It's on Twitter, Helios crew ran into an accident. It says that an avalanche took place on the set, and many people on the crew were injured. Helios seems to have gotten injured too." Barbara was startled. Maisie stood up. "When did it happen?" Riley hurriedly replied, "The news just came out. My aunt and uncle are now on their way to Karelia. Hashtag the crew of A Dream from the Past encountered an avalanche. Hashtag Helios Boucher was injured when saving the crew. Hashtag this piece of news made it into Google Trends not long after it came out, and Helios fans were praying for him." The person in charge of the crew apologized on Twitter. Because the avalanche happened too abruptly during the filming of the snow scene, they failed to respond in time, causing a lot of people on the crew to be injured. He also updated Helios' condition. He had gotten injured because he went back to rescue one of the actresses who was petrified and could not react on the spot. Chapter 932. Because of the explanation from the person in charge of the production crew, many netizens praised Helios for being very brave and manly. Others were running for their lives in danger while he was thinking about others' safety. This had caught the heart of many netizens and turned them into his fans. The information and identity of the rescued actress were found and spread by netizens. She was a new actress who played one of the supporting roles in The Dream from the Past. After finding out who she was, some haters went on to her Twitter profile and described her as someone cowardly who had caused Helios injury. Some even compared her to a scourge. But some of the netizens who could not stand such actions argued with those haters. However, the newcomer suddenly received a wave of attention precisely because of these remarks. She even started to gain followers on Twitter because of this incident. At Karelia, the snow on the streets had been cleared, but layers of snow could still be seen collected on branches and vegetation. The passers-by who walked by wrapped themselves in coats, and their pace was slow due to the slippery road. Christina and Yael rushed to the hospital near the region where the filming crew was in after receiving the news. Helios. Christina appeared outside the ward. The director and several staff members were in the ward, accompanying Helios. Helios had a plaster cast on his left leg, and there were bruises on his forehead. Christina looked really distressed as she hurried to the bedside. "How did you get hurt so badly?" Helios felt helpless. "Mother. I'm fine." "You call this fine?" Christina raised her voice and glared at the director. "Is this how your crew takes care of my son? Why did you notify me so late after something like this has happened to my son?" Mr. Hitchcock understood that she was agitated because she wanted to protect her child and explained patiently, "Mrs. Boucher, I'm very sorry that such a thing happened to the crew. I'm to blame as I didn't notice the sudden incident that took place back in the snowy mountain in time." Christina wanted to say something, but Yael interrupted the conversation magnanimously. "Okay, we can't blame the crew for this too. After all, no one could foresee such an unexpected situation. Besides, our son isn't the only one who got injured. Many crew members were injured as well. We should consider ourselves lucky as long as everyone came out of the disaster alive." Christina calmed down a lot after hearing that. Mr. Hitchcock looked at them and said, "Mr. Boucher, Mrs. Boucher, then I'll go and visit the other crew members first." Yael nodded. After leaving, Christina sat beside the bed and looked at Helios regretfully and in distress. "Look at you. You look like you just came back from a battlefield." His injuries were not even as severe as they were now back when he ran into trouble on Winston Island. Helios smiled. "It's no big deal. I'll be fine in a few days." "In a few days?" Christina looked displeased. "Have you seen yourself in a mirror? Do you think everything will become fine in just a few days? You should be old enough to take care of yourself, so how did you end up in this situation?" "Okay." Yael placed his hand on her shoulder and said rationally. "Helios got injured only because he went back to save someone else. So don't blame him anymore." Christina was about to say something else. But however, that was when Yael helped her up immediately. "No more huts. Helios needs a good rest now. We'll come and see him later." Christina did not say anything else and walked out of the ward with Yael after giving Helios a few words of advice. The ward was finally quiet. Helios sighed, leaned against the head of the bed, and looked out the window at the cold sky. "It's been so many days. And she hasn't contacted me since then. Sure enough, I was impulsive the other night." The reporters were causing congestion at the hospital entrance, and the staff of the crew had to come forward to give some explanations regarding the incident. The next day after the incident, Christina had been accompanying Helios in the ward when Riley stuck half of her head out of the door frame. "Helios, Auntie." Christina was flustered. "Why are you here, Riley?" Chapter 933. Riley came in with a bouquet, scratched her head, and smiled. "Teehee, isn't it obvious that I'm here to visit Helios?" She then walked to the cabinet beside the bed, placed the bouquet on it, turned to look at Helios, and winked. Helios squinted his eyes and said nothing. Riley turned around and walked to Christina's side. Auntie. I can stay with Helios for a while if you're busy. Christina wondered for a bit. But I'm not busy at all. Mother, you've been with me for one whole night. You should go back and take a rest. Let Riley accompany me. I haven't seen her for a long time, so I'll talk to this girl while she's here. Christina looked at Helios and opened her mouth, but did not say anything. She then stood up. Okay, just so that you won't think of me as an annoying person, I'll let Riley accompany you. Remember to call me if anything happens. Riley waved at Christina as she watched her leave. Don't worry, Auntie. I'll take good care of Helios. After Christina left the ward, Helios lowered his eyes and smiled. You deliberately direct your aunt away from us. What the hell do you have in mind now? Riley approached the bed and sat down. What the hell do I have in mind? I'm here only because of you. After saying so, she leaned beside him and whispered, Barbara is worried about you. Riley then walked out of the ward. Barbara was standing outside the corridor. Riley just could not understand what was there to hide as she had already arrived in Coralia. Oh, she's come with me. She placed her hands on Barbara's shoulders and pushed her into the ward. What are you waiting for? Barbara wanted to say something, but Riley had already closed the door behind her. Barbara stood still at the entrance for a moment and took some time to muster the courage to enter the ward. She was stunned when she saw the plaster cast on Helios' leg, and her lips moved slightly. Are you hurt so badly? Helios glanced at her. It's not as severe as you think it is. He paused for a second and continued. You seem to have lost weight. Barbara was astounded for a split second. It's true that I really didn't have much of an appetite recently, but he actually realized that I've lost some weight. She looked away and casually said, I've been on a diet recently. He smiled. Are you fat? Barbara whispered. I'm not thin either. Helios looked at her. You look good, just the way you are. Barbara, who was being stared at by him, felt uncomfortable from head to toe. Especially when she remembered what had happened that night, she felt inexplicably awkward, not knowing what to do in the room. He started the conversation with a question. Why haven't you contacted me? Barbara did not hesitate before answering, you didn't contact me either. Helios was caught off guard and responded with a wry smile, I sent you a text. She glanced at him. When was that? He replied immediately. A few days ago. Barbara opened her mouth for a bit and lowered her gaze. I lost my cell phone, it's been a few days. Seeing that Helios did not say anything, she bit the bullet and explained. I'm not lying to you. I really don't have my phone on me now. He paused for a moment and then laughed. I didn't say that I don't believe you. Barbara stood there and did not utter a single word while Helios adjusted his sitting posture slightly. Aren't you going to take a seat? She glanced around the room, walked to one of the chairs in the ward, and sat down. Seeing that she was usually quite courageous, but seemed so well-behaved and reserved at this time, Helios laughed again. Why are you sitting so far away? Barbara took a deep breath and moved the chair to his bedside. It's not that far. Helios stretched out his hand and placed it on her cold cheek. Is it cold? The warmth of his palm instantly melted her cheek, which had been exposed to the cold wind for the whole time. She was astonished and stared into his gaze. Those tender and affectionate almond eyes looked like two setting suns that were melting the snow, revealing the whole scenery that had been concealed throughout the whole winter. Barbara pursed her lips and wanted to open her mouth, but the door was suddenly pushed open. Nels. Chapter 934. Nina stood still as she saw something, before she could say anything, while Barbara quickly distanced herself from Helios and sat down. Helios also withdrew his hand. What's the matter? Nina shook her head as she returned to her senses and replied embarrassedly. Oh, that's right, Michelle wants to thank you personally because you saved her. Thank God I didn't bring Michelle in directly. Otherwise, this would definitely be another bombshell tomorrow if that girl were to see this. Helios frowned slightly. It's only a trivial matter. Just tell her that no thank you are necessary. But she's already waiting outside. Nina continued. You got injured when you were rescuing her, and this matter has already made it on to a lot of headlines. If you refuse her appreciation at this time, you won't know what the media will say about you when this gets into their ears. Helios rubbed the bridge of his nose. Then let her in. Then I'll go out first. Barbara wanted to get up. However, Helios looked at her and said, No. You can stay right here. Barbara was stunned for a moment, but a young girl had already entered the ward through the door before she could recover from the trance. Nina went back to the door, took a look around the corridor, made sure no one else was following them. And Michelle was caught off guard when she saw Barbara, but she did not think much about it. She had a vacuum flask full of chicken broth in her hand and said with a shy smile, Mr. Boucher, about that day, thank you for saving me. It's all my fault. I'm sorry that I've caused you to get hurt. I've cooked this myself, thank you very much, then closed the door. She handed over the chicken broth with both hands, and her head lowered as if she was afraid of being rejected. This was a token of appreciation from someone else. So Helios had no reason to refuse her gift. Thank you for your broth. Put it on the table. Seeing Helios had accepted it, Michelle gave off an innocent smile. She put the chicken broth on the table and glanced at Helios nervously. Mr. Boucher, how's your injury? He smiled. Don't worry, it's fine. Michelle did not expect that a celebrity like Helios would not only save her but also smile at her. Helios is a tender and forgiving gentleman, as rumor has it. After all, she was only an unknown actress. And all the celebrities that she had worked with had never even bothered to get to know her. I'm glad to know that you're safe. I was worried that I hurt your reputation. Michelle acted and spoke very cautiously. Helios was helpless. Don't overthink. I'll save whoever it is whenever such an incident happens. Michelle's heart trembled slightly upon hearing Helios's comforting words as she felt the warmth coming from him. She suddenly looked at Barbara and asked with a smile, Mr. Boucher, is this your sister? She looked stunning. The smile that was originally hanging on Barbara's face froze after listening to what Michelle said, and even Nina was dumbfounded. Helios choked and coughed repetitively, and at the moment when the atmosphere in the ward was awkward, Barbara put on another smile and replied stiffly. Yes, I'm his sister. As Barbara said that, she glanced at Helios and smiled. The chicken broth has been delivered, she has thanked you, and you, my brother, still need to rest. Although Michelle was reluctant to leave so quickly, Helios' sister had already spoken, so it was not appropriate for her to stay back longer. When Nina sent her away, Helios could not help but burst into laughter. Barbara glared at him expressionlessly. Was that funny? Brother. Damn it. She actually said that I'm Helios' sister. But I'm not even as old as Helios is. Don't look that old? Helios could not stop laughing. He laughed so vigorously that his abdomen started aching. Barbara stood up and was about to leave, but Helios pulled her, and that was when she suppressed her emotions. Are you angry? Barbara furiously pulled her hands out of his grasp and sat back with her arms crossed. Can I not feel angry? She actually said that I'm old. Chapter 935. Helios pinched her cheek. You're not old, you're mature. No matter her appearance or temperament, Barbara did not look anything near an innocent young girl. She had always had a mature and elegant charm, and her facial features looked very regal, as well as very recognizable. Celebrities who looked like this in the entertainment industry would usually go for the sovereign or sexy character setting and style. As for Michelle, she was only 20 years old, she was young, and she went for the fair, young, and energetic style. However, Celebrities with these character settings were in abundance in the entertainment industry. Still, Barbara seemed to care a lot about it and turned her face away. Mature is also considered old in my dictionary. Helios wrapped his arms around her. Barbara was stunned and turned to look at him in surprise. On the other hand, Helios smiled hoarsely. But I like it, and that's all that matters. Barbara was startled again. She was so touched that it seemed like a firework had been set off in her heart. She then raised her head and kissed his lips. Helios lowered his gaze, clasped the back of her neck with his palm, and intensified the kiss. While all these were happening, he wrapped her in a whirlpool of warmth, causing her to forget everything about the cold winter. There was a snowfall outside. The snowflakes landed on the glass windows, and the frost blurred the panes. On Christmas, the private elementary school was very lively. All classes were filled with very warm and cozy decorations. And even the campus was decorated with lights to celebrate Christmas. On that day, the school was open to the public, and the students' parents could also visit their children and the teachers and even watch performances on campus. Dad, Mom. Am I pretty today? Daisy was wearing a red skirt that had white velvet edges and a pair of short boots. She also had a Christmas hat on and one pigtail on each side of her head. She looked very adorable and pretty. She approached her parents and turned around in a circle. Maisie raised her hand to adjust the crooked hat for her and smiled. You look pretty. So beautiful. Nolan looked at Maisie. She resembles you more and more as she grows up. Maisie snorted softly. I'm the one who gave birth to her, so, of course, she's going to resemble me. I'll be damned if I allow all three of them to look like you. It's not an issue for the two boys to resemble their father. But if my daughter were not to resemble me too, I'd be scoring my genes with an F. Daisy pouted. I think it's better to resemble Dad. Nolan turned his head away and chuckled. Maisie flicked her little head lightly with her knuckle. You wouldn't look good if you were to look like your father. Daisy pointed at him. That's not true. Look at how beautiful Colton looks when he dresses up as a girl in a skirt. They even claimed that Colton looks prettier than me. Maisie glanced in the direction that Daisy pointed and was shocked. Colton, who was surrounded by a group of classmates, was wearing a golden wig and a tutu dress that resembled that of a Western princess. Maisie really would not have recognized that it was her own son if she had not looked closely. Maisie asked, why would Colton dress up like that? Daisy giggled. Nolly was the one who had to play the role of the princess, but Colton owes Nolly a favor, so he agreed to play this role for him. He owes him a favor? That kid seems only to hate Nolles on a superficial level. Maisie rubbed her chin. Colton looks really amazing when he dresses up as a girl. So what if, she turned to look at Nolan. Nolan just happened to exchange a gaze with her. He immediately cleared his throat lightly as if he had seen through her thoughts at a glance, looked around, and approached her. Don't be ridiculous. I'm already in my 30s, and you want me to wear a dress? Maisie rested her chin on his shoulder, inserted her hands into his jacket, and said softly, hubby. I want to see you in a dress tonight. Maisie placed her hand on his shoulder, raised her eyebrows, and chuckled. You can wear it in front of me, straightened his body, and looked away. Chapter 936. Daisy kept her eyes on her brother and didn't notice what was happening behind her. Nolan held her hand. Be a good girl. I won't if you don't agree. She pulled her hand away and turned around. Nolan rubbed the center of his eyebrows and put out his arm to pull her back. Let's talk about this later. Maisie, who was leaning in his arms, smiled proudly. The play was going to start. Colton stood on the stage. But the parents and students from other classes didn't notice that the princess was a boy. The prince was played by another boy in their class, while a girl played the evil dragon rider. The lights were all focused on the stage, and the performance was so exciting that all eyes were on them. The evil dragon rider kidnapped the princess, and when the wires pulled them up, they slowly rose into the air. Suddenly, all the lights were out, and when everyone was in shock, a girl screamed. Everyone took out their phones for the flashlight. Nolan noticed something and ran toward the stage, while Maisie suddenly stood up. And her expression changed. Colton. The teacher's voice came through the sound system when the lights were back on. The circuit broke and caused the wire machine to jam, leaving the two children hanging 30 feet in the air. The girl was crying out of fear and was hugging Colton tightly. Colton hung there, not daring to move and looking pale. Nolan asked people to bring some mats over and stood under the two children. Colton. Dad. I feel. Colton slowly looked up. The wire was slowly breaking. Nolan noticed that, and his expression changed. Colton, don't move. Trust me. I won't let anything happen to you. Don't move. Maisie covered her mouth, her heart almost jumping out of her throat. And she immediately helped with moving the mats. Daisy stood among the people who were rushing around and looked around. She saw someone run past from the upper floor when she looked up. She ran past the crowd and went outside. Maisie, some parents, and some teachers brought more mats. And someone yelled, "It's going to break." Maisie looked up. The wire suddenly snapped, and the two children fell. The parents off stage all stood up and screamed in panic. The two children fell onto the mats. And Maisie and Nolan rushed forward to help Colton up. Colton. The other students and teachers ran over to see if the girl was all right. Colton leaned between his father's arms and slowly opened his eyes in a daze. Dad, Mom? Maisie hugged him right, her eyes red. I thought I lost you. Nolan stood up and grabbed the collar of the vice principal, who had just rushed over. What happened? Why would such a thing happen during a student performance? The vice principal was sweating bullets. Mr. Goldman. We're looking into this accident. You best do your best to find out the cause of that, or I won't let you get away with this. Nolan pushed him away. The vice principal immediately bowed. Yes, of course, Mr. Goldman. Don't worry, we'll run a thorough investigation. After the incident, the rest of the performance could not continue because the parents were worried. No parents would be relaxed, no matter whose child that happened to. The vice principal and organizers apologized to all the parents and promised to give them a good explanation. Meanwhile, Chapter 937. Daisy walked out of the building and poked her head out from behind a wall when she saw someone leaving suspiciously. She ran to the flower bed, squatted down, and saw that person walking toward a car parked in the school compound and standing by the car. Daisy looked out. The window was rolled down, and she saw a woman inside but couldn't see her face. Suddenly, a hand came from behind and covered her mouth. She wanted to scream, but the person shushed her. It's me. Daisy paused and turned around. Nolace was standing behind her. Nolly. You ouch. Daisy's mouth was covered up again while he put one finger in front of his lips. Don't make a sound. Daisy nodded. He let her go, and they both turned back to look. The man said something to the woman in the car and got in on the passenger side. The women looked out the window, and Nolace pressed Daisy's head down. He stared while the car drove away from them, looking puzzled. Nolly, Daisy whispered. He didn't reply but walked out of the flower bed after confirming that the people had left. Daisy followed along. Nolly. They were the ones who tried to hurt Colton, right? That sneaky person must have been related to Colton's incident. Nolly stood there quietly before turning to look at her. No, after pausing for a few seconds, he looked away. They were trying to hurt me. Daisy looked shocked and walked in front of him. Why would they want to hurt you? Did you do something to them? Nolans looked at her, unsure what to say. However, when he saw how serious she looked, he put out a hand, patted her head, and turned around. "Let's go see how your brother is." Daisy pouted. Knowles must have been hiding something from her, but she followed along. In the break room, the vice principal didn't know how to resolve the tense atmosphere with the parents. The incident was related to Mr. Goldman's son, no less. Nolan sat on the couch, looking still, obviously angered by the situation. Quincy came with some people. Mr. Goldman. Nolan's fingers were crossed and placed on his thighs. He looked up with his cold eyes. "Did you find anything?" Quincy replied, "Yes. There's no problem with the circuit backstage. There was no tripping. Someone shut the system down." Nolan's eyes were cold and piercing. "What about surveillance?" Quincy brought the crew over, and that person said nervously, "There's no surveillance on the second floor of the stage. All the cameras would black out once the main circuit was switched off, so nothing was captured." The vice principal walked over. "Mr. Goldman, none of the teachers or crew would have done this. The school is open to the public for Christmas. So maybe someone snuck in." The principal agreed. "Yes, all the teachers and the few crew members have been investigated. Every crew member on the second floor would vouch for one another that no one left midway." Nolan frowned. The school was open to the public during Christmas. So if someone had snuck in, they would have to check all the parents and outsiders. That would be finding a needle in a haystack. "Dad." Daisy suddenly appeared in the break room. She ran over. "Dad, it's not someone from our school. I saw them." Chapter 938. Nolan was surprised. "What did you say?" "I saw a man run out suspiciously, so I followed. They left in a car." Nolan's face dropped when Daisy said that, and he barked after a long time, "Daisy Vanderbilt. Who said you could do that?" Daisy was stunned because her father had never raised his voice nor questioned her before. She bit her lip and frowned. "I can't just let people try to hurt Colton. Even though that person wasn't really trying to hurt him." She didn't dare look up at her father because she knew he was angry. Nolan took a deep breath and asked the principal and vice principal to leave. Once they did, only a few people were left in the break room. Daisy's head was still hung low, pressing her lips together. Nolan rubbed his nose bridge. "Daisy, if something like this ever happens again, tell me. Children shouldn't be deciding, okay?" "Okay," she quietly answered. Quincy looked at Nolan. "Mr. Goldman. Daisy said that the person didn't want to hurt Colton?" Nolan frowned. Daisy looked up at Quincy. They were planning to hurt Nolly, but Nolly switched characters with Colton. Quincy was surprised. Nolan looked at Daisy and then at Nollins, who was standing at the doorway. He then said to Quincy, "Bring Daisy out." Quincy held Daisy's hand and led her out. She watched Knowles walk in and turned around. When she was at the door, she pulled her hand back. "Uncle Quincy, do you think Dad will scold Nolly?" Quincy smiled. "Don't worry. He won't. I don't believe you. Dad is definitely going to blame Nolly." "No, I won't leave." Daisy leaned on the door. Quincy put his hand on his forehead. This young lady was going to torment him. In the break room, only one adult and a child were left. They kept eye contact for a long time before Nolan squinted. "You knew they wanted to harm you?" Knowles didn't dodge the question. "Yes." Nolan leaned back on the chair, his eyes piercing cold. "Did you use Colton by switching characters with him?" Just 8 years old yet unpredictable. Nolan couldn't help but suspect him. If Knowles had been aware that those people would attack him during Christmas and switched characters with Colton, then this child wasn't innocent. He could no longer stay at their home. Knowles didn't answer. Nolan stood up, walked toward the boy, and looked down at him. "I'll get Tristan to take you home." When he walked to the door and opened it, Daisy fell in, but she caught her footing. She looked up at her father's dark eyes and smiled. "Dad," Nolan looked annoyed. "Who taught you to listen in on people?" Daisy looked down and didn't say a word. Quincy walked forward. "Mr. Goldman." "She was just worried that you would do something to young Master Knowles." It was better before he explained, because Nolan looked even more upset once he did. "He'll move out tomorrow. You're not allowed to speak to him anymore. If he didn't take matters into his own hands, his daughter might just run away with this boy." He walked away upon saying that. Daisy was frozen on the spot. What did Dad mean by moving out? Is he throwing Nolly out? She turned around to look at Knowles, who seemed lonely and sad under the light. Chapter 939. Knowles turned sideways, looked into Daisy's eyes, and then smiled sadly. Daisy bit her lip, turned around, and ran out. Nolan informed Tristan to bring Knowles away after the incident with Colton. Tristan knew what it was about and remained silent before sending someone to fetch Knowles. Knowles and Colton didn't show up at school after a few days. Daisy looked at the two empty desks, and her fingers tightened around the pencil she was holding. At the Goldman mansion, Maisie walked past the study and looked in through the half-closed door. She saw Nolan standing in front of the window. Maisie crossed her arms and leaned at the doorway. "Did you send the child away because you think he set up Colton?" Nolan slowly turned to look at Maisie. After a long pause, he said, "That child has a complicated past. It's best not to have our children spend too much time with him." Maisie looked down. "You're hiding something from me." Nolan frowned. Maisie walked in front of him. "You didn't tell me about the child, and why did Daisy say the people were trying to harm him?" She knew that Tristan wanted to let Knowles stay with them for a while so that Nolan could protect the child. But she had definitely been shocked because of what happened on Christmas. Nolan walked around the desk and took a seat on the soft chair. The person who would want to get rid of the heir of the Knowles would be Tristan's mother. Maisie was shocked. Why? Nolan told her that Tristan's mother was the second wife of Elder Master Knowles. Tristan and his brother, Sam, were half-brothers. Elder Master Knowles had had Tristan at an old age, so Tristan was only 8 years older than Sam's son, Rick Knowles. After Elder Master Knowles' passing, Sam was the one who took over, but Tristan's mother took over the Knowles 2 years ago because Sam had fallen sick. She wanted to get rid of Sam and Rick, and Knowles had been kidnapped 2 years ago. After going through something, Sam probably knew that it was probably related to Tristan's mother, so he got people to take Knowles away to protect him. Maisie couldn't understand. Since Tristan's mother wants to get rid of that child, why doesn't she let Tristan take over the family affairs? Nolan looked down. Tristan doesn't have a good relationship with his mother. From what I know, she never took care of him since giving birth, and his father and brother brought Tristan up. Maisie pressed her lips together. She would never have guessed that was Tristan's past. That his mother had never taken care of him. But if Madame Knowles didn't care about her child, why did she keep him? Colton, who was hiding outside, looked surprised. He didn't know that Knowles had gone through so much and had even been kidnapped before. He pouted, turned, and walked away. In the study, Maisie suddenly asked after a long silence, "They've found him all the way here. I guess they already know that he's in Bassburg now. Do you think he's in danger?" Nolan looked at her, but was silent. Maisie walked to the window. "You know that mothers would not want to see children put in danger. Knowles is just an 8-year-old boy. His living condition would decide how he grows up. Even if that child isn't innocent, he saved Colton. Colton had told her that Knowles had saved him before. If not for him, Colton would have been in a worse situation than what happened on Christmas." Chapter 940. If saving Colton was part of that Knowles plan, then putting Colton in danger in his place after saving him made Knowles pretty scary. Such mindfulness and careful planning shouldn't be something an 8-year-old child could do. Thus, Maisie didn't believe that Nole saved Colton as part of his plan because no one could control or predict the future. Even more unlikely for a child. Nolan got up, walked around the desk, and stopped in front of her. I know you don't have the heart to put a child in danger. But I have no choice. We have 3 children, and I can't put them in harm's way. Maisie looked around while deep in thought. Nolan returned to Black Gold, and soon after he got to his office, Quincy knocked, entered, and gave the details from the investigation to him. Mr. Goldman. This was the suspicious car we spotted near the school during Christmas. Nolan took the file and frowned. That's a number plate from a different state. Nolan nodded. Yes, that's a plate from Octavia, and I've sent someone to find out who the owner is. I should get the results back in a day. At Coralia, in the hospital. Barbara walked out of the elevator with food in her hand but bumped into Michelle and her assistant. Michelle smiled and greeted her. Are you here to visit Helios? Barbara didn't really want to interact with her. But she smiled and nodded out of respect. Yes. Michelle held her arm as a friendly gesture. I'm here to see him too. Let's go together. Barbara raised her eyebrows. She didn't like to pretend to be close to strangers. She pulled her arm back and smiled. Let's. She walked in front. Michelle pouted and followed after. When Helios saw Michelle showing up behind Barbara, he frowned. Michelle walked toward him with a smile. Helios, I came to see you with Barbara. Barbara placed the food on the table with a stoic expression. That girl used her. Helios noticed that and smiled. Michelle thought that he was happy she visited him and took the food over from her assistant. Helios brought lunch for you. There's no need for that. Helios took the food that Barbara brought. Michelle was surprised and looked a little awkward as if she was going to start crying. Helios, do you not like it? I'm sorry, I just want to thank you. Helios looked calm. I can see your sincerity. Saving you was just an instinctive response. I wasn't expecting anything in return. I hope you understand. Michelle's assistant was worried that she offended Helios and explained, Mr. Boucher, that wasn't what Shelley meant. She was just feeling guilty because you got hurt while saving her. This isn't anything serious, don't worry about it. I don't want the media speculating that I only saved someone for a reason. You should understand. Michelle's assistant could hear the warning in Helios' statement. Her expression changed, and she immediately tugged at Michelle's sleeve. All right, we should let Mr. Boucher rest. Let's go. Michelle bit her lip and looked back when she was leaving with her assistant. The gentle smile on Helios' face toward Barbara surprised her.